We're talking about levels of oppression. Most of what we do as social workers is really to buffer the impact of oppression on others, individuals, families, groups, communities. Hopefully, we also make changes to try to end oppression. And the truth is, if we had social and economic justice, and if every family was intact and healthy, a lot of our work would be over. So, we all know some forms of oppression. The causes of oppression might be as simple as this quote: the oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is the fear of the unknown. Of course, I would change it to humankind. And there's different ways of presenting that oppression. It can be institutionalized in our laws, policies, whether or not certain people have access to resources. It can also be personally impacted in how we treat each other. And it's also about how we perceive ourselves, how we internalize it. In fact, you can judge how well a system oppresses by how well the oppress themselves. Here we're talking about oppression of all kinds. And really, oppression is about fear of limited resources and somebody other than you getting those resources. That other changes over time. It can be based on inequality that separates us.
Which doll is the black doll? And which one is the white doll?
That
Which doll is the pretty doll? Which doll is the nice doll? Which doll is the bad doll? Which doll is the nice doll? And which doll is the bad doll? And why is that doll pretty?
because she's white and he has two eyes.
Which doll is the ugly doll? Why is that doll ugly?
Because he's black.
Which doll looks most like you?
Like me.
Yeah, which one looks like you?
And that one.
Okay.
That
doll. Can you show me the doll that you like best or that you'd like to play with?
This one. I like that one.
Okay.
This one.
That one?
This one. I like to play with this.
And can you show me the doll that is the nice doll? And why is that the nice doll?
He's white.
And can you show me the doll that looks bad? Okay. And can you give, and why does that look bad?
Because it's black.
And why do you think that's a nice doll?
Because she's white.
And can you give me the doll that looks like you? "15 out of the 21 children preferred the white doll."
Yeah, that one.
Which one?
This one.
Why do you want that skin color?
Because I don't know. I don't know.
Not sure. What do you think of that skin color?
Well, it looks kind of whitish, and that's all I remember.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about you? Why do you want that skin color?
Because it looks lighter than this kind, because this looks a lot like that one.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I just don't like the way brown looks, because the way brown looks really nasty for some reason, but I don't know what reason. That's all.
So you think it looks nasty?
Well, not really, but sometimes.
Sometimes. And Brielle, they asked what color adults don't like. Do you remember what you said? Which one? That's right, that's what you said. Why do you think adults don't like that color?
Dark.
Dark. And adults, you think adults don't like dark?
Well, maybe some adults do, but maybe some of them don't.
Mm. And then which was the ugly child?
So show me the smart child. Okay, why is she the smart child?
Because she looks like me.
Okay. Show me the mean child. Okay, why is she the mean child?
Because she's way darker.
Okay. Show me the good child. Why is she the good child?
Because I think she looks like me.
Okay. Show me the bad child. Why is she the bad child?
Because she's a lot darker.
Show me the ugly child. Why is she the ugly child?
Because she's like, a lot darker.
¿Cuál muñeco es bonito? ¿Cuál muñeco es feo? ¿Cuál muñeco es malo?
Ninguno.
¿Cuál muñeco es malo?
Este.
¿Y por qué?
Porque, bueno, este es moreno y este es blanco.
¿Cuál muñeco es feo? ¿Por qué?
Porque a mí no me gusta el color café.
¿Cuál muñeco te gusta más?
Este.
¿Cuál muñeco es bueno?
Este.
¿Y por qué?
Porque no me dan miedo los güeros porque tengo más confianza con si los un poco más así como este, no tengo mucha confianza.
¿Cuál muñeco es malo? ¿Por qué?
No sé.
¿Cuál muñeco es feo?
Este. No sé, es que me parece que está un poquito, ¿cómo te diría? Más moreno y no se ve tan blanco. Y no tiene mucho aspecto.
¿Por qué el muñeco blanco es bueno?
Porque sus ojos son azules y todo su cuerpo es blanco.
¿Cuál muñeco es feo? ¿Por qué?
Porque está negro.
¿Por qué ese muñeco es malo?
Porque está café.
¿Y por qué que este café es malo?
Porque pega.
¿Cuál muñeco te gusta más?
Blanco. Porque sus ojos están bonitos y su raza también.
¿Cuál muñeco se parece más a ti?
Un poquito a este. Es que soy un poquito güerita de mis piernitas y de mis aquí, de mi espalda y de mi carita y mis bracitos los tengo morenitos.
¿Cuál muñeco se parece más a ti?
Este.
¿En qué?
Las orejas. Sí, vamos.
Why is she the bad child?
Because she's black.
And why is he the ugly child?
Because he looks like he's white.
Why is he the dumb child?
Because she has dark brown skin.
Why is she the bad child?
Because she makes fun of everybody else's skin color.
Show me the child who has the skin color most adults like.
And show me the child who has a skin color most adults don't like.
Dumb child.
Dumb child.
Okay, why is she the dumb child?
Because she has black skin.
Show me the mean child. Why is he the mean child?
Because she's brown.
Show me the bad child. Why is he the bad child?
Because he is black.
Okay. Show me the ugly child. Why is he the ugly child?
Because he's brown, black.
Show me the child who has the skin color most adults like. And show me the child who has the skin color most adults don't like. Show me the child who...
Being a comedian and having a disability, I didn't find many challenges with work. Being someone who dreams on TV, being someone who is a writer, being someone who is an actress, I feel like entertainment and broadcast news ignore the fact that ADA also applies to them. This was signed 25 years ago, and most workplaces still ignore its existence. They still think that accommodating is an option because of the word reasonable accommodations. And I work with people with disabilities who are in their 20s and 30s, or they're just graduating college, and they're terrified for the person interviewing them to know they have a disability. They're trying so hard to get through the process and pass as able. That's not the world that we should live in at all. And that is the reality for so many people. If you turn on the TV, we're invisible. We're not present on daytime talk shows, panel shows, soap operas, morning news shows. We're not the anchors. We're not the hosts. We're not even guest co-hosts. And I was watching a very famous cable news woman who's known for her intersectionality. She said live on television, we cannot invite wheelchair users into the studio because our studio is not accessible. I had been in that studio. It was built 2 years ago. Why are they still building studios that are not accessible in this day and age? Why? Because we're not thought of. We're not thought of. When people talk about diversity, they're not talking about people with disabilities. They're not. We've been completely run over in the intersection of intersectionality. You would think, since we're the largest minority, that everyone bumps into at least one disabled people and they know disabled people. Guess what? That's not the reality. I don't know how. I don't know why. But I've had people tell me, you know, he never saw anyone like you before. And I think it comes back to storybooks, to television, to really actively making sure that it's not one character for one episode in a wheelchair that disappears the next day. Look at Sesame Street. When I was growing up, Sesame Street had a deaf woman. That changed my perception. She was part of this normal world that has Muppets, but like this world that I was so accustomed to, just like old people like Mr. Hooper, who died and taught me what death was. And those images are gone. So there's a couple of characters that do have disabilities sprinkled throughout children's television, but it's not something that you're seeing often enough.
I started collecting ads and talking about the image of women in advertising in the late 1960s. As far as I know, I was the first person to do this. I tore ads out of magazines, put them on my refrigerator, and gradually I began to see a pattern in the ads, a kind of statement about what it meant to be a woman in the culture. I put together a slide presentation and began traveling around the country. In 1979, I made my first film, Killing Us Softly, Advertising's Image of Women, which I've remade 3 times since then. These were some of the ads in my original collection. long time ago. Feminine odor is everyone's problem. If your hair isn't beautiful, the rest hardly matters. Honey, your antiperspirant spray just doesn't do it. And I'd probably never be married now if I hadn't lost 49 pounds, which one woman told me was the best advertisement for fat she'd ever seen. I'm going to do a very abbreviated version of this talk, of course, today, but I want to begin with the question that I most often get asked, which is, how did you get into this? What got you started? Many factors in my life led to this interest. I became active in the second wave of the women's movement right away in the late 1960s. I'd worked in media. I spent a year in London working for the British Broadcasting Corporation and a year in Paris working for a French film company. This sounds much more glamorous than it was. I was a secretary. In those days, options for women were very limited. I was a secretary, I was a waitress, but I did have one other option that I rarely talk about. I was encouraged to enter beauty pageants and to model. This is artfully cropped to make it look as if I won. I was in fact the runner-up. This was my first ad, and I think the car tells you something about how long ago this was. And this ran in a London newspaper. So modeling was one of the very few ways that a woman could make money in those days. It was very seductive. But for me, it was also alienating. It was soul-destroying. There was a whole lot of sexual harassment that came with the territory. So I didn't follow that path. But it left me with a lifelong interest in the whole idea of beauty and the power of the image. Since that time, advertising has become much more widespread, powerful, and sophisticated than ever before. Babies at the age of 6 months can recognize corporate logos, and that's the age at which marketers are now starting to target our children. At the same time, just about everyone feels personally exempt from the influence of advertising. So wherever I go, what I hear more than anything else is, oh, I don't pay attention to ads, I just tune them out. They have no effect on me. I hear this most often from people wearing Abercrombie t-shirts, but that's another story. The influence of advertising is quick, cumulative, and for the most part, subconscious. Ads sell more than products. Now, in many ways, we've obviously come a long way. But from my perspective of over 40 years, the image of women in advertising is worse than ever. The pressure on women to be young, thin, beautiful is more intense than ever before. It's always been impossible. Years ago, the supermodel Cindy Crawford said, "I wish I looked like Cindy Crawford." She couldn't, of course. No one can look like this. But it's really impossible today because of the magic of Photoshop, which can turn this woman into this woman and then try to make us believe that an anti-aging cream can do this. Now, she's a beautiful woman, but older women are considered attractive in our culture only insofar as we stay looking impossibly young. We learn to read men's and women's faces very differently. Here we have Brad Pitt and former supermodel Linda Evangelista, about the same age, each one of them in an ad for Chanel, but he gets to look like a human being and she's transformed into a cartoon. Now sometimes, every now and then, a celebrity resists. And as you may know, just this week, Lorde sent out a tweet with an unretouched photograph below the Photoshop version. And she tweeted, "Remember, flaws are okay." Good for her, but this doesn't happen very often. Men are Photoshopped too, but when men are Photoshopped, they're made bigger. Andy Roddick laughed when he saw the bulked up arms on this cover photo and suggested they should be returned to the man they belong to. The obsession with thinness is worse than ever because of Photoshop. Her head is bigger than her pelvis. This is an anatomical impossibility. The actual model for this ad was fired for being too fat, and they used Photoshop to create this freakish image. More recently, they used Photoshop to remove the dreaded thigh gap. Unfortunately, they also removed a very important part of her body. So the image is impossible for everyone, but particularly for women of color, who are considered beautiful only insofar as they resemble the white ideal. Light skin, straight hair, Caucasian features, round eyes. Even Beyonce's skin is lightened in ads. The image isn't real. It's artificial, it's constructed, it's impossible. But real women and girls measure ourselves against it every single day. Of course it affects female self-esteem, and it affects how men feel about the very real women in their lives. Women's bodies are dismembered in ads, and ad after ad for all kinds of products. And sometimes the body is not only dismembered, it's insulted, as in this amazing ad that ran quite a few years ago in a lot of women and teen magazines. This is the whole ad, and I'll read you the copy. Your breasts may be too big, too saggy, too pert, too flat, too full, too far apart, too close together, too A-cup, too lopsided, too jiggly, too pale, too padded, too pointy, too pendulous, or just too mosquito bites. But with Depth styling products, at least you can have your hair the way you want it. It is ludicrous, but this ran in teen magazines. Teen magazines target 12-year-old girls. Here they're saying to 12-year-olds, your breasts will never be okay. So our girls are getting the message today so young that they have to be incredibly thin and beautiful and hot and sexy, and that they're going to fail because there's no way to measure up to this impossible ideal. The self-esteem of girls in America often plummets when they reach adolescence. Girls tend to feel fine about themselves when they're 8, 9, 10 years old, but they hit adolescence and they often hit a wall. And certainly part of this wall is this terrible emphasis on physical perfection. Men's bodies are very rarely dismembered in ads, more than they used to be, but still it tends to come as a shock. This ad ran about 20 years ago in Vanity Fair. These are all from the national mainstream media. And it was one of the first examples of turning men into sex objects. But when this ad ran, about 20 years ago, the ad was so shocking that the ad itself got national media coverage. It's a good thing it got some coverage, I suppose. Reporters called me up from all around the country and said, look, they're doing the same thing to men they've always done to women. Well, not quite. They'd be doing the same thing to men they've always done to women if there were copy with this ad that went like this. Your penis may be too small, too limp, too droopy, too lopsided, too narrow, too fat, too pale, too pointy, too blunt, or just 2 inches. But at least you can have a great pair of jeans. It would never happen, nor should it. And believe me, this is not the kind of equality I'm fighting for. I don't want them to do this to men any more than to women. But I think we can learn something from these 2 ads, one of which did happen, one of which never would. And what they show us very vividly is that men and women inhabit very different worlds. Men basically don't live in a world in which they're, well, let me move on to another. There are stereotypes that harm men, of course, but they tend to be less personal, less related to the body. However, men are objectified more than they used to be, but there really aren't consequences as a result of that. Men don't live in a world in which they're likely to be raped, harassed, or beaten. At least straight white men don't live in such a world, whereas women and girls do. When women are objectified, there's always the threat of sexual violence. There's always intimidation. There's always the possibility of danger. And women live in a world defined by that threat, whereas men simply do not. The body language of women and girls remains passive, vulnerable, submissive, and very different from the body language of men and boys. And probably the best way to illustrate that is to put a man in a traditionally feminine pose. It becomes obviously trivializing and absurd. Grown women are often infantilized in ads, and increasingly, little girls are sexualized. Now, I've been talking about this for decades. I wrote a book about it, and it's getting worse. This little girl is 9. And this is happening in a culture in which there's widespread sexual abuse of children. Images like this don't cause this problem, but they certainly normalize very dangerous attitudes towards children. Padded bras and thong panties are sold for 7-year-olds in major department stores. And the latest product, high heels for babies. Not to leave boys out, you can get t-shirts for your toddlers that say things like Pimp Squad. So boys are sexualized too, although in a very different way than girls. Boys are encouraged to look at girls as sex objects. Boys are encouraged to be sexually precocious. And boys are learned to be tough and invulnerable, basically starting in infancy. Basically, we allow our children to be sexualized, but we refuse to educate them about sex. The United States is the only developed nation in the world that doesn't teach sex education in its schools, but our kids are getting sex education. They're getting massive doses of it, but they're getting it from advertising the media, the popular culture. This is an ad for jeans, although something seems to be missing. But each one of these ads for major international products, major mainstream media, very graphic. The problem isn't sex. It's the culture's pornographic attitude towards sex, the trivialization of sex. And nowhere is sex more trivialized than in advertising, where by definition it is used to sell everything. Whatever you're giving him tonight, he'll enjoy it more with rice. I don't think I'm particularly naive, but I haven't figured out yet what the hell you do with rice, you know. Maybe it's wild rice. One woman shouted out she just hoped it wasn't minute rice. So this is an old ad, of course, and you can say, well, sex is always used to sell, and that's true. But it's far more graphic and pornographic today than ever before. And just to illustrate that, I'm going to show you an old ad using, this is an old ad using sex to sell food, and here's a current one. Burger King, the Super 7-incher, it'll blow your mind away, for a mainstream product, as is this one. Now, all of these images, I think, are actually profoundly anti-erotic. Because in advertising and the popular culture, sexuality belongs only to the young and beautiful. If you're not young and perfect looking, you have no sexuality. And this makes most people feel less desirable. How sexy can a woman feel if she hates her body? The internet has given us all easy access to pornography these days, and as porn becomes more available and acceptable, the language and the images of porn become mainstream. Young celebrities emulate the porn stars, and these days you can get your little girl a pole dancing doll. Girls are encouraged to present themselves as strippers and porn stars, to remove their pubic hair, and to be sexually available while expecting little or nothing in return. And at the same time, they're insulted. Tastes great, goes down easy. As girls learn to sexualize themselves, as they learn that their sexual behavior will be rewarded, they learn to sexualize themselves, to see themselves as objects. These images cause real harm to real girls and women. Girls exposed to sexualized images from a young age are more prone to eating disorders, depression, and low self-esteem. Inevitably, the objectification leads to violence, and that's become much more extreme too. Advertising often normalizes and trivializes battering, sexual assault, and even murder. The truth is, most men are not violent. Overwhelmingly, most men are not violent. But many men are afraid to speak up, are afraid to support women, and are afraid to challenge other men. And I have great admiration for those men who do. These ads don't directly cause violence against women, but they normalize dangerous attitudes, and they create a climate in which women are often seen as things, as objects. And certainly turning a human being into a thing is almost always the first step toward justifying violence against that person. And that step is constantly taken with women and girls. So the violence, the abuse, is partly the chilling but logical result of this kind of objectification. So in all these ways, things have gotten worse. But in one big way, they've gotten much better. I am no longer alone. There are scores of films, hundreds of films and books and organizations like the Brave Girls Alliance, which recently had a great event in Times Square. Media literacy is being taught in our schools. There's political action taking place around the world. And I have an extensive resource list on my website that lists lots of these things. I'm inspired by young activists like Julia Bloom, who at the age of 14 launched a petition to 17 magazine, asking them to limit their use of Photoshop. And she succeeded. Here she's celebrating with some of her allies and inspired other girls to do the same. This generation gives me hope. But we have a long way to go. The changes will have to be profound and global, and they'll depend upon an aware, active, educated public, people who think of themselves primarily as citizens rather than primarily as consumers. We are all affected by these images. We all have a profound stake in challenging them. We must create a better world for ourselves and our children. After all these years, I still have hope that we will. Thank you so much.
Oppression exists and is perpetuated on a number of levels. When oppression is institutionalized, it means that the different systems that make up our society have created roadblocks, ways that prevent one group from succeeding or having equal access to the resources as another. There's differential access to the goods, services, and opportunities of society by anyone who's in a certain race, sex, or anything else that's going to be discriminated against. A lot of oppression is seen by who gets the resources and who doesn't. When people look at poverty, they often come to conclusions about what causes poverty. Many times, people forget to zoom out wide enough to look at who has access to resources and who doesn't. One of the things about the United States is that we have this myth that if you work hard enough, you too can be whatever you want. And the truth is that we are a class-based system, and that those who are in upper classes have access to the resources, and those in the lower classes have less access. There are always examples of people who defeat the odds and who are able to succeed even given their poverty or their oppression. But they are the exceptions that are held up to us as if they're just an example. And so then if we aren't succeeding in our lives, we can blame ourselves. We just didn't try hard enough. And instead of looking at the systems that keep us back. It's a very effective system as part of the internalized oppression. Plants. And I like the plants. In fact, I make sure that this plant has all the oxygen and all the sunlight and all the soil and fertilizer that it needs. And I make sure that I place it exactly where it needs to be to get everything it needs. Well, I had this other plant too, right? Same exact plant. They both are spider plants. This one got more ignored. It wasn't placed in a place that really got all the sunlight it needed. Can you see how the leaves are more pale than this one? I don't know if you can with my camera. But this one definitely has been neglected. If you touch the soil, it's dry, whereas the other one's nice and moist. I didn't give this one sunlight enough to grow. I didn't water it enough. Okay, personally for me, it just actually was in a place where I didn't notice it and I forgot about it. So here I provided resources mainly because I noticed this one. And the prettier this got, the more I noticed it, and the more it gave me pleasure, the more I fed it. And so in this situation, yeah, this one's not going to do as well. This one's not going to grow as big and be as healthy and be as big. In fact, because of my neglect, little bugs and things are going to start nibbling on it because it's dying. And because it's not as healthy, it's not going to grow and thrive. Same plant. I could just say, wow, this was a dud plant. Something's wrong with that. But I actually know I gave more care to this one. Here, I did it without meaning. But what if I did it with intent? What if I'm in a drought, which is actually true, and I decided that I only had enough water to give to one. So maybe I decided to give to this one. It's already a little prettier. Well, maybe I decided I don't have enough time or attention or care to take care of two plants, but I could one. And so I put all my attentions there. Well, let's suppose from the day one, I just didn't have a good feeling about this one. And I actually chose to put all my time and energy into this one. You know what I could do is if I started to feel bad that I wasn't being nice to this one, I could start to blame this one and say, well, you know what? You're just not as pretty. You're not as strong. I just don't see how you're going to make a big impact in this world. So I'm gonna put my resources over here. So sometimes the gardener does this without even realizing. Other times, the gardener does it with great care and deliberate means. We as social workers, We're here to make sure that the resources get spread evenly.